Hi, everyone. This is Nicole Baumgarten for the ADHD Entrepreneur Summit. And I'm very, very excited to be here today with John Kruse, who's joining me to talk on making friends with scheduling. And before we jump into that very important title for ADHD entrepreneurs, John, welcome.
Glad to be here today. Thanks.
Can you give us a short history or who is John Kruse and where are you from?
So originally I'm from Cleveland, Ohio, and I attended medical school and a PhD program in neuroscience in University of Rochester in upstate New York, and then went to California, University of San Francisco to do a psychiatry residency program. And during 4 years of residency program at a very good training institute, there was not a single mention that adults could have ADHD. This was in the early 90s. We just thought that was something kids have and they outgrow it. That
Wow.
was the standard dogma. So it was towards the end of the mid 90s, papers began to be published that, wait a minute, some adults do have it. And the very first patient that was referred to me was a guy, I'll cut this short, but he was in his mid 40s. He had had more than 100 jobs. He was above average intelligence. He had been in psychotherapy for 7 years with a well-respected therapist. Therapist said, this guy isn't getting any better. Could he have ADHD? Referred him to the university hospital for 3 days of neuropsych testing. And they came back with the assessment. If you were an 8-year-old boy, he'd definitely have ADHD. He blurts out comments. He's walking around the room. He's distracted by the listener's earrings, X, Y, But since adults don't have it, we don't know what's going on. So that was, and they said, here, you're the new recent graduate. You figure out what he has and treat him. But that was my introduction to one, adults can certainly have ADHD, and to learn about it as it was just then a developing field that adults could have it and what we can do about it. And it remains one of the very few areas certainly in psychiatry, but I'd say in medicine in general, where most of what we do with adults is we're borrowing what's already been shown to work in kids. And most of those things really do work, whether it's medications or other approaches. And scheduling is part of that approach. So for 30 years, I worked in San Francisco, outpatient psychiatry. I do talking therapy as well as medications. I do see people with depression and other conditions, but ADHD is a big focus. Then in 2019, I wrote a book called Recognizing Adult ADHD. When I started trying to promote the book, COVID happened and shut down book readings and other things. I started doing a YouTube channel. So now I have more than 200 videos, mostly 20 to 30 minutes on different aspects of ADHD, some other general mental health topics. A lot of it's on medications, but it's on other approaches too. And then I also started writing on medium.com, where I have 300 articles on ADHD and different aspects of mental health.
So you have really seen it since it kind of in its early stages in its infancy, really, where I'm sure many people had it, but no one could diagnose it. Gosh.
Yeah, it didn't suddenly appear in adults in 1993 or 4. It was there.
Yeah, sure.
One of my most interesting patients is someone I started working with when he was 99. And he had had a fall and injured his arm, and there was a lawsuit. And it was so clear, and we got pretty extensive history, clearly not too many corroborators of, the history, but, this was not a dementia picture at all. This was someone who had a lifetime history of ADHD.
As you say, there's been a lot of progress since then, thank goodness. And thank goodness for the likes of me who kind of, who now have benefited from all of the information that is now available and out there. Still always learning though. But as you say, that's so interesting that it's kind of obvious, but so interesting that a lot of the research still remains. And what we did with kids, we now apply to, a lot of it works, obviously. But interesting, I'm sure that there's a lot more work that can be done there in terms of sort of adult ADHD and how that Yeah, especially in entrepreneurs and people in business where, the overlap with kids is kind of similar but very different. But I'm sure that a similar challenge to what kids would be experiencing and what you would advocate, I'm sure, for kids too, is making friends with scheduling. And when you say that, making friends with scheduling, I loved school. I loved the structure that school had, the bells ringing. I was very fortunate in that I was a kind of a bit of a, I mastered my ADHD really successfully. And I worked really hard. So I didn't have some of the hectic challenges that other kids with ADHD had, but mastered a whole lot and struggled with self-confidence, etc. But the structure and the idea of the schedule and having a timetable really did appeal to me. As much as I kind of wanted to be a free thinker, I needed that kind of idea of structure. How can a schedule be a friend to somebody with ADHD? And why is this important?
My definition of a schedule is a system that's aligning your own goals, your own values with what you are doing in the minute. And part of that's usually in the list of things for a successful business man or woman. This is not specific to ADHD, but part of why it's particularly important in ADHD is that people with ADHD have trouble creating their own schedule, their own structure, their own containing. And part of it is at a neurologic level, there's how time is processed is aberrantly, according to the mainstream people, there's what we would call future discounting or delayed discounting, that what's in front of you becomes all important, and what's in the future, either negative consequences or even rewards, are harder to see and harder to become aware of. So in terms of an entrepreneur, someone being successful or being productive, I'd say a schedule is essential to keep things on track. And as Nicole had mentioned, so many people, when they hear the idea of schedule, they sort of rebel. I'm being forced to do things I don't want to do. I hate, and again, that's not what a schedule is. A schedule is something that the best, kindest, nicest part of you is drawing up for yourself. So again, that you are doing in the moment what aligns with your own bigger goals or life values, goals, aims. And I often use an analogy. Again, so many people with ADHD view a schedule as the guy with the whip on the Roman galley telling people, stroke faster, stroke fast. It's to make you work hard, to make you stay in alignment. And they rebel against it. Of course, that doesn't sound attractive at all. My analogy is more, a schedule is like the mother hen who's counting all the chicks around her, making sure everyone's in the right place before hunkering down and nestling and taking care of and nourishing them. So that's my sort of general idea of or approach to what a schedule is, and to try to get that into your mind. Because if you're feeling you're being coerced, if you're feeling you're being told to do what you don't want to do, that's not going to work too well. And many people with ADHD have tried different scheduling systems and said, I've tried that already. It doesn't work. My approach is, okay, you've tried that one and doesn't work. There are almost an infinite number of variations on this general idea. We'll find a way that works for you. And yes, acknowledging part of why we're instituting this is because it is hard for you to have come up with yourself to have created.
Do you help sort of nurture this into being with your patients? I mean, is this one of the things that you actually bring into reality for them over time or quickly or slowly? Is this something that you help people develop?
I emphasize that this is important. So there's at least two different groups of researchers about 10, 15 years ago who developed cognitive behavioral strategies for dealing with ADHD. And cognitive behavioral strategy was developed for depression in the 60s. In some ways, it is a horrible fit for ADHD because it requires doing lots and lots of boring homework, paying attention to what you're doing, repeating stuff over again. And cognitive behavioral therapy is based on the premise that your brain is in charge of all your actions, in charge of all your thoughts, and in charge of all your feelings. And again, this is developed for depression, and that most of us can't say, have direct command over our feelings. You can't just say, okay, be happy if you're depressed. But you can change your thoughts and you can change your behaviors more easily. And if you systematically keep working on how you frame and see things and what you are doing in the world, your feelings will change. So cognitive behavioral therapy says that each of those three legs of the triad, feelings, thoughts, behaviors, shape and change each other. If you feel differently, you will act differently, you will think differently. But if you think differently, you'll act differently anyway. So there were early attempts to try this for ADHD because it works for depression, it works for panic, it works for other things. And again, it just didn't work until they adapted it slightly. One of the New York hospitals led by Mary Salanto and another group with Harvard and UPenn professors led by Safran and all. And the core is you need to have a task list and you need to have a schedule and you need to find a way to combine those two. In the past, I've done some, formally going through the cognitive behavioral therapy approaches. And one thing, again, that's not a great match for ADHD is the best predictor of success for the cognitive behavioral programs, not just in depression, but specifically studied in ADHD, is how well you do your homework.
I mean, is you setting up your own success metric here? You kind of looking after yourself by saying, how am I swaying away from where I want to go? And how will I tell that I've achieved what I think I'm setting out to achieve?
There's often an initial enthusiasm. Someone with ADHD grabs onto an idea. Oh, great. This is going to be the thing that carries me to success. This is what I need. And in the first few days and weeks, they can stick with it. But we know things take practice. And point where things often fall apart is after several weeks where it's no longer novel, where it's no longer exciting, but it hasn't yet become ingrained. You asked a sort of a question in terms of helping develop schedules. One is I'm not that internet savvy. I mean, there are dozens of programs that will do a lot of this for you. And my approach, sort of like when people ask me to refer them to a book to read, I'd say everyone's style is so different. I think Driven to Distraction is a great book. And if you don't like his, style, or you think something's a little flippant or off, it won't resonate with you. So I don't usually make a specific recommendation there. And I don't even make a recommendation as to whether this needs to be an online thing or a pen and paper thing. But the basics are it should be accessible. So having a whiteboard at work or at home may be great, but you're not going to carry that under your arm when you go to lunch with someone, and you need your schedule there. Because if let's meet up next Friday to discuss this further, and you don't know whether Friday's open or you're pretty sure it's open, and you'll remember it when you get back to your office, and you're back to the office, you engage in something, and next Friday comes by and you blew off Jill and she's calling you, why the hell didn't you show up for a lunch date? So it has to be accessible because you have to be able to add to it whenever you need to. And it has to be, my approach is to use something that's simple enough to use without a huge barrier to be using it. I had one person, and this worked with them because they had a significant element of OCD in combination with their ADHD, but they used their printing machine connected to their computer to make like a 7-page booklet every week and had 6 different categories of there's religious needs and their work needs and their this needs and their 2-week planning and their 4-week planning. And that was more work than most people would, particularly with ADHD, would want to engage with each time. So the other thing about a schedule is you need to be checking it every day, usually first thing morning, but some people it works better the night before. And I've had people say, I know I need to do that, but it just feels so daunting. It feels so overwhelming. They're being confronted with, the weight of 100 different tasks it feels like during the day is what. So I often sit with them in the session and say, okay, let's actually time it to see, pull out your schedule. Let's look at what's on it for today. Let's look at your weekly task list and what needs to be transferred onto that for today, how long does that take? It takes less than 2 minutes for most people, even with busy, productive lives. It's one thing for me to tell you it takes 2 minutes. It's another to sit and actually do it and say, oh, okay, that wasn't that bad or overwhelming. And now I actually have a greater sense of control because I know what I do need to do today, and I know what are lower priorities and don't necessarily need to be done.
That is such a big part of it is the clarity of it, and that sense of overwhelm because you actually don't know what the size of your list is until you actually look at it, right? Sure. So, John, what goes on the schedule? I mean, I know you've alluded to this, but what can go on the schedule? What does go on the schedule?
I focused on simplicity, but I'm going to clutter your schedule to begin with. So I think there's 4 big things that actually need to go on your schedule before you put any work elements or school elements or tasks in there. 4 big things I say are things that sort of reflect that we are biological beings. Yes, we're thinking about business and commerce and our human aspects, but we are animals, and we have a need for sleep. We have a need for meals and eating. We have a need to be moving and to have exercise. And we have a need for rest, relaxation, downtime, meditation. So those are the big 4: sleep, meals, movement, exercise, downtime, or free time. And it may seem like, why do I have to schedule that? And you need to schedule that because people with ADHD tend to have really poor biological habits. Measurably, sleep tends to be not insufficient, but inconsistent. And we know a big timer for sleep is our circadian clock. It's not just the fatigue factor. We know getting 8 hours a night approximately is useful for almost everyone. But it's not just the same 8 hours. So if you're used to sleeping, say, midnight to 8, and you stay up at a party or doing something or reading a book or going into doom scrolling on the internet, and you don't go to sleep till 4 a.m. and then you sleep in till 4 plus 8 is till noon. You've gotten the same 8 hours, but you are not going to feel as rested. Part of that, and we've just learned this in the last decade, is that the garbage sweeping or the dishwasher of the brain drainage system that was only discovered fairly recently.
What is it called, John?
Lymphatic system in the body is connected to the vascular system, the arteries and veins. The lymph system in the body is what sort of flushes toxins. In the brain, it's called the glymphatic system. It was discovered actually at my alma mater, the University of Rochester, by Macon Nedergaard, she has an appointment at the University of Copenhagen as well. So part of it is that this system, the dishwasher of the brain, is only active at night. It's only active actually during deep non-REM sleep, so a very specific stage of sleep. And it's only active when that non-REM sleep is happening during normal nighttime. So there's a circadian factor. The cells shrink back a little bit, and the space between cells becomes bigger, and cerebral spinal fluid is washing through the brain, and it is washing out all sorts of chemical debris and toxins, including those chemicals that build up and eventually are associated with Alzheimer's, the beta plaques and neurofibrillary tangles. I'm getting too much into neuroscience. I'll back out. You should be scheduling that. Ideally, you would sleep the same time weekends as weekdays. I know there are people who are forced with shift schedules and other systems. We've known for decades how unhelpful those systems are to a functioning brain. But so scheduling sleep. Meals seems, why would I need to schedule meals? Well, part of it is people with ADHD, and there's a little evidence that interoception, so information from your body to your brain, is maybe less clearly processed or signaled. Or it could be they're getting the right interoceptive information, they're just not paying attention to it. So when I have a person in the office that I'm evaluating for a first time and they're saying, oh, it was 4 o'clock yesterday and I realized I hadn't eaten all day. Almost always that's someone with ADHD. Now there's people who consciously have fasting regimens, people who intentionally deprive themselves of food for certain hours of the day. But to have it inadvertently happen is almost always an indicator to me that they have ADHD. And you can't function well if you're tired. You can't function well if you're hungry. When everyone is in a workplace situation, not that everyone ever was, but in pre-COVID, it was a lot easier. There'd be big social cues. Everyone else is going to lunch. You go with them. From home, particularly, it's so hard to be aware. Oh, I'm not getting hunger signals until I'm so hungry that you should have done something earlier about it. So scheduling meal times, I'd say, is important, needs to be on your calendar. We know some amount of vigorous exercise a few times a week is well associated with greater physical health, but also mental health. There's a considerable body of research on exercise having direct benefits for ADHD and people being able to focus better both during exercise. There's at least one study looking at cognitive functions when people are on a treadmill, but also most people feeling well for several hours, focusing better, attending better, concentration longer. Probably should have some vigorous exercise at least a few times a week. But also importantly, you need to be breaking up the day. So, there's people who get so involved in their work, their video games, or whatever, that they are sitting in one place in one chair for 8 hours at a time. That is not good or healthy. So breaking up big blocks of time so there's at least some movement. And then the fourth category before we get to the work elements is some amount of, we all need rest, relaxation. We all need a break. Having that set aside on the calendar and knowing that it's going to happen makes it much easier to get through 3 hours of grueling spreadsheets. If I do have a break set up. I have half hour of cat videos that I'm going to be watching at 3:00. You're not then, working in frustration, not knowing, is this ever going to end? Am I just immersed again with the ADHD? All there is now, but your calendar can help you remember, no, I actually do have some break time later. I do have this to look forward to. I'm not going to be here forever working on this. And there are, value to meditation. I'm lumping meditation, relaxation, downtime all together because I think there's a lot of individual variability in terms of what someone needs and how it works. In the short term, can people do all-nighters? Sure, they can. In the short term, can people skip lunch 3 days in a row? They can, but it's not an ingredient for a sustainable, ongoing approach to the world.
As you were talking, I realized, and it's not that I haven't realized this before, but I don't know if this is normal for ADHD, but I definitely put all four of those things on the back burner. For me, work comes first. Hyperfocus comes first. The dopamine hit comes first. All of the doing comes first. And then if I can fit in some sleep and I can fit in some food and I can fit in some exercise and I can fit in some rest, well, then I'll find some way to kind of squeeze that in. You're saying that actually needs to turn on its head.
You can push through all night and pull an all-nighter, but is the quality of, every study I'm aware of has looked at, the rate of, again, in people with ADHD or without, several hours of sleep deprivation, very simple things. How well can you add up a column of numbers? How well can you find spelling errors in this paragraph? So, yes, you can push through when you're hungry. Yes, you can push through when you're tired, but your work is not going to be your optimal work. So part of this is getting you to, and that doesn't mean we have to be at peak performance all the time, but we don't want to have avoidable errors encroaching and eroding the progress of success we're making in our projects just because we're too tired, too hungry.
A break can be, eating, not that it would be healthy, but eating could be a 5-minute thing. It doesn't need to be a 1-hour meal. And R&R, rest and relaxation, could be a 5-minute thing. It doesn't need to be a half-hour or a 3-hour movie or,
most of the emphasis on a schedule is sort of getting you to do what you're going to do during the day, but a schedule is also a learning tool. So if you figured that you're scheduling 10 minutes for lunch and 5 for breakfast, but that you're continually overrunning those times, or it's not sufficient, or you need a longer break, you can learn that better having used a schedule than just sort of arbitrarily living your day.
You'll
that
never
you're tired.
remember.
But am I
Yeah.
tired because I was working too long, because I didn't take enough rest, because I didn't eat well? With a schedule, you can see what you've done, and that gives you much better information as to what might need to change. And I'm going to be less prescriptive in terms of how do you schedule work into it. I mean, my general rules are probably blocks of time of 2 hours. Studies suggest most people, even if they're hyper focusing, are losing some aspects of concentration and focus and real productivity without a break after 2 hours. I also think if you're trying to schedule work projects in blocks shorter than 15 minutes, or even at 15 minutes, you're getting too micromanaged. Most often, thinking in terms of half hour, 1 hour blocks is the most sort of useful strategy. And that's sort of how most day planners, computer, or the paper age are written. If it's a lunch appointment, if you're moving somewhere, that one of the most helpful cues or clues I've picked up along the way is you need to think in terms of expected time of departure, not expected time of arrival. So often people think, oh, I'm meeting Sally for lunch at 12 o'clock. And yeah, it's 11 o'clock. I'm doing this and this. They're not worried until it's 12 o'clock. Aspect I alluded to at the beginning with the cognitive behavioral approaches is coordinating your task list with your schedule. And all of the ADHD experts, and I'd agree, and this is that you should have one single task list. So many people who try to be organized have, oh, I have a list for this project. I have a list for things at home I need to do. I have a shopping list. I have this. And you have 42 lists that you can't even keep organized or together. But the things you need to do probably should be on a single list. And then the other thing is, oh my God, now I have 143 things on my list. When I review each morning, am I going to have to sort the priority all the way, and again, keeping it simple is to have sort of three general categories. One are the things that are important and urgent. Those are things that really have to happen today. The B category are the things that are important but are less urgent. It might be writing up your summary of this travel trip or whatever, or project or whatever it is. Now, it's important, it needs to be done, but it doesn't have to happen today. And then three are all the things that are, yeah, you need to have them done, but they're not particularly important or urgent. And often people with ADHD, in the attempt to, I need to get something done, I need to have something feel productive, you know, I do need new shoelaces. Oh, I'll go buy up the shoelaces today. And then I can cross that off the list. And you have nice shoelaces, but you missed your meeting appointment and you don't have your expense report written up when you needed to have it done. You should make sure all the A's are done for the day, or my exception is you don't have to have it done for the day. You have to have a block of reasonable time where it's highly likely it will get accomplished before you
Yeah.
do any of the B's. And you have to do all the A's and B's before you move on to any of the C's. Now, your shoelaces, if your shoes are falling, that C item will navigate up to become a B or an A if it's a big enough, if it's urgent enough. So coordinating that task list with, slotting in everything that's an A, where can I fit it in today? And sometimes it's hard for people, any of us, but ADHD makes it hard. What is really urgent and what really isn't? That does take practice and skill, and there's some amount of, sometimes you might get that wrong, but pretty often what's an absolute urgent, really has to happen.
I mean, we all work with this kind of sense of kind of either huge curiosity or a massive deadline that kind of drives us to motivate us to act, right? So it could be that today is the day. It might have been a B and a C for the last 2 weeks, but today it's an A.
Yeah.
So I suppose, I mean, that if anything, that drives you, to create it as your A for today. Would have been great had you done it before, but it didn't motivate you, weren't motivated to do it. So I love this kind of what you sort of suggested in terms of, can I alter my schedule? I mean, and how do I motivate myself to use a schedule?
Particularly when this is new, someone looks at their schedule and sees, oh, this is what I have today, or more to the point, right at the time, okay, 2 o'clock, I'm supposed to make these 3 cold calls. And what usually happens is What comes up in most people's minds? All the negatives. Oh, that's going to be so much work. Oh, I don't really know those people. Or, oh, I know these people and she can be prickly and he can be a grump. And all the negative things are what tends to be triggered by a schedule or by the prospect of work. And again, one of the 18 symptoms of ADHD on the official is reluctance to begin a task that seems to be require lots of sustained effort. So sometimes, or many times, when someone is confronted with that, all the negative feelings, how much work, how much effort, how difficult, how challenging, how they try to motivate themselves by saying, oh, but I have to do it. I need to do it. I ought to do it. I should do it. Those are not motivating issues or aspects or forces. What motivates people is getting in touch with why they want to do it. And again, remembering the analogy of who put this on the schedule. This is the kindest, nicest, wisest part of you who is trying to, again, align what you're doing in the moment with your longer term goals. Again, part of why this is so hard for people with ADHD is the now is everything, and the longer term goal is harder to keep in mind, or why this would be fun, or why this would be productive, or why I'll feel good having done it, or even reminding themselves, if you're not in the gym, getting your gym shoes together and all that seems, oh, that's a slog. But reminding yourself, wait a minute, I actually like it when I'm working out. I like, getting my heart rate up. I like sweating, or I like the beautiful bodies, or whatever you like to see. So one thing I often recommend people is write on the schedule itself. And so this does depend on what system you're using. It's often helpful to write 2 or 3 words in your own thoughts and of why you want to do it. Because it's usually there when you're planning, when you're putting it on the schedule, and it's almost never there when it comes up at that time of day. And an alternative to writing a note on the schedule is for some things, like if it's getting to the gym, putting a reminder on in a sticky note and putting it on your gym clothes. So you can see, oh, you like getting your heart rate up. Oh, you like where it's warm and there's lots of friendly people. You like feeling that your muscles are getting bigger or your gut's getting smaller, whatever it is that you like about that experience.
What a nice idea. That is a great idea. I'm going to introduce that into my scheduling from now on. It's kind of really introducing the why. Because I put sticky notes up on my computer or whatever, but when I'm looking at my list, the kind of, it's just a long task list of things to
And
do.
there's the out of sight, out of mind with ADHD.
Yeah. And can you alter your schedule?
If your building's on fire, if there's an armed intruder, yes, deviate from your schedule. But again, part of what's inherent in ADHD is thinking, what's in front of you is more exciting, more interesting. That's what I want to grasp on and go for. So you are working against your own brain. The schedule is your attempt to work against that and to say, yes, it's tempting to play 2 more hours of Sudoku on my device, to watch the Academy Awards all over again and see who won. That feels more interesting. That feels more compelling. And again, getting back into wait a minute, who set up this schedule? Who's telling me to do this? So I would strongly resist, except in an emergency, and attempts to alter the schedule. And again, that means in the moment. What I alluded to earlier is one of the biggest values of a schedule is that it helps you much more systematically assess what's working or what's not working. So if you know you've been scheduling those cold calls at 1:30 every day because that seemed to be a good time to do it, but you realize, one is siesta time is a real biological phenomenon. There is a lull in alertness, not even dependent on whether you had a big meal or not in the middle of the day. If you learn, I can't schedule that most undesirable task, then it just doesn't happen. I need to put it at a different time. Again, unless you have the data, you don't really know what's not working. You just know it's not working or you haven't made any of the calls. So yes, you can alter your schedule, but that's in a thoughtful sort of end of the week review type way, not in the moment.
Can I alter my schedule? Absolutely. It's your schedule. The point is that exactly what you were saying is that the schedule is there in your best interest. So sure, you can change the schedule. Is it serving you to change the schedule? Is it serving your kind of why you're doing this and nurturing yourself? Is it serving your ultimate purpose and why you're doing what you're doing on the schedule to
Yeah.
change it?
Particularly early on, following your schedule is unfamiliar. It's going to be hard to be perfect. What I tell people is life will keep giving you opportunities to practice. So don't beat yourself up. Don't think I'm a complete failure. Don't throw this schedule out the window. I mean, it might be. I actually really need to look at, maybe it's silly to make cold calls at 8 in the morning when no one else is in the offices and working and is answering their phone. There's a fine line between being considerate and kind to yourself and letting everything slide. I mean,
Yeah.
the temptation is, doesn't matter. I can just keep ignoring the calendar. Well, if you keep ignoring the calendar schedule, then your life will probably be the same disorganized mess. That it was before you tried this approach. And you're trying to use this approach to get a little more continuity, to get a little more structure, to get a little more productivity going.
Feel as if you're getting somewhere because it can really feel like a daily grind where you wake up a year later and you kind of feel like, have I really moved? I've moved in so many different directions. I'm not sure if I've moved forward, backwards, sideways. I don't know. Learned a lot, but not quite sure that I'm kind of following any kind of trajectory in terms of a journey. Yeah. So interesting that what you were saying, I did time blocking for a while where I tried to kind of really sort of carve out my time with different clients on different days for my consulting business. And when it wasn't working, I was almost ready to chuck it out the window when I realized that all I needed to do was just shift around some of the days because the prioritizing just didn't work. And as I started to shift, it took about 2 or 3 months for it to actually start working. But eventually, actually, I managed to start focusing on certain clients on certain days, and it's really streamlined the work. But it does take time, and it takes focus, and it takes patience with self. It takes
Yeah,
patience to kind of realize that
absolutely.
you don't have to chuck it out the window just because it didn't work the first time.
From the therapist's point of view, sometimes I see a slightly different pattern where someone is one day a week or one every 2 weeks has their schedule intact, and they'll say, wow, I was so productive. I got everything done. And yet still, why is this only happening once every 2 weeks instead of every day? I mean, it takes some people time for it really to sink in that this is working and productive. When you're setting out your blocks of time for work or a project, if there's tasks that you have a tendency to get so engaged in that you're going to blow through your schedule for the rest of the day, it's really important to set some kind of alarm to remind you, hey, look at the clock, see, am I still supposed to be working on this task, or is it really time to let go? And again, part of my message that's hard in the ADHD mind to hold on to is, as long as you're alive, you will have tomorrow and tomorrow and tomorrow, or you will have that same 2 hour productive time. And again, it might be you wind up adjusting your schedule at the end of the week to make that a 3 hour block of time every day.
Yeah.
Or it might be that, yes, I was hyper focused, but the first 2 hours were productive and the last four were just interesting to me, but I'm not getting anywhere with things.
Well, John, this has been absolutely fascinating. Thank you. It's really, really been helpful in terms of realizing that kind of essential physiological, sort of mental, physiological, spiritual, I want to say it, you know, layer is kind of so critical to actually put in first and not the other way around. Really, to prioritize those things first, I think is absolutely critical. And you end up actually not having much time. You're kind of limited to the amount of time you then actually end up having to do the productive work, which is also not necessarily a bad thing, right? Because you don't end up kind of frittering it away on all sorts of
No.
things that weren't on your list at all.
If you have ADHD, free time is your enemy. The most common reaction is, oh, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this, I could do this. And nobody's telling the wife, the boss, the coworker aren't telling me what to do. So often a huge chunk of that is just frittered away. And then the end of the weekend or the end of the break or the end of whatever free time, it's like, I didn't get anything done. One of the other values of a schedule, particularly if it's not an online one where it erases the task when you've done it, is that you can see at the end of the day what you've actually accomplished. And so often, particularly people with anxiety or worries, or what's undone, what's still not finished, is what hangs in our mind and clouds our thoughts. And it feels, I haven't got that done. I haven't accomplished anything. If you have a schedule, you can say, oh, I got 14 things done yesterday. This might still be hanging over me, but you have a much more even and accurate perspective of what you're accomplishing in your life.
Absolutely wonderful thing to be able to see. In fact, I have a digital tool. I use ClickUp for my task management, but they actually give you the option to kind of keep your tasks visible. So, you can actually see when you've kind of drawn a line through it, they're still on the list. It doesn't disappear, you know, because otherwise you don't get that sense of accomplishment. You can't reflect and kind of see how much you've done.
Yeah.
It's one of the most attractive things, I think, of pen to paper is that you can physically see that line drawn through, it's done, which really does feel good, especially when you feel like you've had a truly unproductive week and you go back and you actually look at the things that are crossed out. Yeah. To me, it seems a little bit like when you started speaking, you started talking about aligning with your kind of goals and your values. And so I started thinking about business strategy. And it actually is a sort of a life strategy. It's just giving yourself the structure, is giving yourself a kind of the action list in how to actually embody the life strategy at the end of the day. And this is obviously to do with business, but it's the same thing, aligning with the values, aligning with your goals. But the structure is the kind of action list of how you're going to get there. And so, I mean, it's not very different from that, but it almost seems as if kind of, again, well, these things seem so new to us each time we have a look at them.
When I've used those phrases or said things like that to many people with ADHD, fairly common response is, I don't even know what my values are. I don't even know what my long-term goals are. If they don't have a goal or an idea of what they're going to achieve, most people don't achieve much.
It's one of my best things to do with my coaching clients is to go through that process of determining that self-awareness of what your values are. And I've just had an interview with somebody who kind of realized that they had aspirational values, but they weren't necessarily his values until he was kind of brutally honest with himself in terms of what really, really, really mattered to him. And it's such a wonderful discovery, because I think in that authenticity comes through as well, where you kind of really then starting to embrace who you are and realize that it's kind of safe to be that person,
Most people really are aware of, is it making money that's really important to them? Is it building community? Is it defying this or that? Most people do really know what many of their values are, even if it's harder to map that out.
It's such a good point, and I know we've gone completely off point here, but not really, is that values matter because we tend to be people pleasers. We don't like saying no. So we often marry and enmesh our values with what other people want. So getting back to what we want is really, really essential. We end up living everyone else's life.
Not get too political, or we wind up in a situation with all these people saying, oh, I think he's a horrible man, but I think he's doing X, Y, or Z, without really reconciling, well, this is actually opposed to what.
And that's absolutely true. Is that, I mean, well, that goes to a whole other tangent about being consistently inconsistent. Yeah, making promises and all sorts of things. Good intention. And thank you so much. Thank you for your time.
You're welcome. And delightful talking with you.
Cheers, John.